guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and in today's build guide I finally got my hands on an AMD Radeon RX 6800. We're going to see in today's build just how this stacks up against the 3070 in a build guide from start to finish. Without any further ado though, let's dive straight into it. I'm going to save our graphics card for later, and as always today kick off by installing as many components into the motherboard as possible. Namely, we're kicking things off with AMD's new Ryzen 5600X, making this a killer all AMD build. To install it, we're going to pull up the retention arm on our motherboard and just align the gold triangles. So this triangle goes to that triangle, then nicely drops down into place. Pop the arm back down, and this 6-core 12-thread chip is ready to go. I've coupled it with Gigabyte's B550 Aorus Pro. It's one of the best B550 motherboards around and has all the features we could possibly need today. The next component I'm going to install into the motherboard is actually our RAM choice. This is from XPG and it's their Spectrix D60G. I would recommend a 3600MHz kit if you can get your hands on one, as that really helps out with Ryzen performance. Installing it's pretty easy. Align the notch on the RAM with the notch on the corresponding DIMM slot and just pull back the retention clips. We're installing into the second and fourth DIMM slots, and you can do that super easily by sliding it in and applying even pressure to both sides. The next component I'm going to install is our SSD. This is brand new from XPG and it's their Spectrix S20G. I've used the ARGB S40G a lot, but this new drive takes it up a notch. Look at that. That is a good looking RGB M.2 drive right there. This is a 1TB NVMe drive and it's going to work perfectly for our build today. In order to install it though, we need this, a teeny tiny little screwdriver. It's going to go into this slot at the top here, and to do this we just need to unscrew this retention screw. That is this one, and then our M.2 drive slides nicely into place. Pop it in at a 45-degree angle before pushing it down and securing it with that same screw we removed just a moment ago, a little something like this. And just like that, we're ready to install the cooler. Specifically, I've opted for this Cooler Master's Master Air MA410M. This white box contains all the mounting hardware we'll use in a second, and then actually the rest of the box is just the cooler. Is just the cooler itself. We've got 220mm RGB fans on here, and the whole thing is going to light up like a Christmas tree. Inside that white box I talked about, you're going to get a backplate with 4 screws through. Make sure these are in the right locations to simply slot through the rear of the motherboard. They go in a little something like that, and that's going to allow us to fasten the cooler properly back down. You'll also find in this box a few screws like this. These are female to female, and they will hold that backplate in, so we can screw the cooler nicely into place. Add these to each corner of the backplate, and then finally take these 2 brackets. These are actually going to bolt onto the bottom of the cooler today, and these are what actually secure down into those 4 screws we just popped onto the motherboard. Apply a dab of thermal paste that comes included in the cooler's box, and go ahead and fasten the cooler down into place. With the motherboard looking great and nicely out the way, I'm going to grab our case choice today and get it moved over. Specifically, I've gone for the Cooler Master MB520 ARGB with addressable RGB fans at the front, a tempered glass side panel, and support for ATX motherboards. There's really not that much more you can ask for. Removing both the side panels like we have makes it as easy as possible to screw the motherboard into place. The motherboard's pre-built I/O shield means all you've really got to do is simply feed the motherboard into the chassis, where a slightly raised center standoff will temporarily hold it into place. Simply then secure it down a little something like this with the included screws, and we're pretty much off to the races. Next up, I'm going to install the graphics card, do our power supply last, our cables and wiring, and then jump into some gaming benchmarks shortly. Now, the graphics card is quite exciting. Now, I know there's been a big controversy over stock for GPUs. I know people are going to call AMD's launch a paper launch, and to a degree it is, but all we seem to cover on this channel lately is Nvidia, and I really do want to give AMD a bit of time in the limelight, because if you're not too fussed about ray tracing, then this actually is a really great choice, and potentially outperforms the 3070 at a price point that's actually quite attractive. Of course, stock pending. So this is a really nice looking card actually. This is AMD's equivalent of the Nvidia Founders Edition, so it's their kind of, not their reference design, but their own in-house design. We've got 3 large fans, the Radeon kind of outline, and this really nice metal backplate. All in all though, it's a great looking card and I think it's going to look really quite nice in the build today. To install the graphics card, you just need to push back the clip on the PCIe slot and then remove the second and third PCIe bracket covers. There we go, bit of a snug fit. It's going to slide into place and fasten back down with the PCIe screws we removed just a second ago. That brings us quite nicely then onto the final component of the build today, the power supply. And there's nothing better than Cooler Master's new 650 watt Gold V2. Fully modular, pretty affordable, but I'll link everything with pricing and availability down in the description below. We're going to go ahead and plug in a CPU power connector, a motherboard power cable, a SATA power harness, and of course a dual 6+2 pin PCIe power cable. That's going to power up the CPU connector in the top left corner of the motherboard power connector in the right hand side, our graphics card with the dual 6+2 pin PCIe power connectors, and then any RGB fan controllers with the SATA power cables. And the power supply is just going to screw in really nicely through the back of the chassis with the fan facing downwards, pulling fresh air in from underneath the case. It really is that simple. With the PSU and the power cables now installed, all that's left to do is just pop in our final cables and wiring. These include our USB 3 front panel connector, which is the largest of the bunch, our JFP1 front panel cables for our power and reset buttons, as well as the HD audio connector. And on that note, I think it's about time that we actually go ahead and boot this machine up to see how it performs in loads of the most popular titles, but more importantly for me, how good it looks when it's all powered up in an epic glam montage. Roll the montage! Alright then, now you've seen just how good this system looks when it's all powered up, let's take a dive and see exactly how it performs. On your screen now are the 15 games we tested with this machine, a snapshot view of just how well it performs at 1440p, the ideal resolution for an RX 6800. We're going to take a closer look at 6 of these titles in just a second and their performance, but if you'd like to see the full gaming benchmark runs of any of these 15 titles, check out the playlist in the card section now on our new channel called Benched. Let's take a deeper dive though into some of these games, starting off with GTA 5 and wrapping up with Cyberpunk and Fortnite. GTA 5 at 1440p high settings in the game's inbuilt benchmarking mode looked great and gave us 125 FPS on average, with 116 and 112 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. Watch Dogs Legions at 1440p also performed really nicely. First up is 1440p very high settings with RTX enabled, or I should say ray tracing enabled, AMD's version of Nvidia's RTX, and here we saw 106, 98 and 92. Not at all a bad result, but I would say the ray tracing doesn't quite look as good as on a 3070. Turn ray tracing off and here it tunes up to 118 FPS on average. Straight rasterization performance, aka gaming without any ray tracing, is where the 6800 excels, but it's nice to be able to enable that ray tracing if you fancy it. Call of Duty's Black Ops Cold War is the next title we tried today at 1440p high settings. We got 170 FPS on average, with 160 and 148 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, and that's tested in the game's multiplayer zombies mode. Apex Legends is next up, 1440p high. We got some great frame rates, 197, 168 and 162 for the average 90 and 99th percentiles, with the unlimited frame rate enabled in the Origin game launcher settings. Next up today then is Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk is such an incredibly difficult game to run and has so many bugs that the performance is a bit bonkers, but we tried out first at 1080p high settings and got 118 frames per second with 95 and 80 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, and then secondly at 1440p. 1440p high settings, no DLSS support here of course because it's an AMD, not an Nvidia GPU, and we got 122, 98 and 81 frames per second. Some really respectable results actually in Cyberpunk, and in terms of straight rasterization, this 6800 XT is performing really very well. Fortnite is the last game on our list today then, and by popular demand we tested it at 1080p high and then 1080p competitive settings. 1080p high yielded 269 FPS on average, with 190 and 182 for the 90 and 99th percentile results, and 1080p low gave us 312 FPS on average. That is insane, with 250 and 212 for the 90 and 99th percentiles. All in all, I've been very impressed with the performance of this 6800. Not having DLSS is a bit of a bummer, but in terms of straight rasterization, AMD have killed it here. Let's just hope they can get some damn stock. If you enjoyed this video, found it a bit different, let me know in the comments below. Make sure to drop a like rating, get subscribed if you aren't already. Thank you for watching though, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.